Medusa was not born a monster. She was made one by the goddess who was supposed to protect her. Ancient sources disagree on how. Some say she dared compare her beauty to Athena's and paid the price for her pride. But the Roman poet Ovid, in his Metamorphoses, preserved a darker version, one that cuts to the heart of how divine power treats the powerless. In his telling, she was a young priestess, beautiful beyond measure, who served faithfully in Athena's sacred temple. Her golden hair caught sunlight like spun silk. Her eyes held the depth of ocean storms. She had devoted her life and her future to the goddess of wisdom, sworn to her service. And when she was violated in the most sacred space on earth, when everything was torn from her by force, the goddess she served punished her for it. This is Ovid's telling of Medusa's curse, and it raises a question that echoes across every age. What happens to those failed by the very justice meant to protect them? Athena's most sacred temple was a place apart from the mortal world, a space where the goddess of wisdom and war was honored above all others. The women who dedicated themselves to her service gave their lives to it, vows of devotion, of spiritual commitment, of service to something greater than mortal desire. Among these sacred women, Medusa shone brightest. She was one of 3 sisters, daughters of ancient sea-deities, but she alone had chosen the path of divine service. While her immortal sisters, Athena and Uriel, reveled in their monstrous forms and terrible power, Medusa had been born mortal, born beautiful, born to choose her own fate. And she chose devotion. Every dawn found her tending the sacred flame. Every dusk saw her prayers rise like incense to the goddess she served. She wore simple robes that could not diminish her radiance. Her golden hair was braided with olive leaves, Athena's sacred symbol. She moved through the temple like starlight given form, and those who saw her whispered that even the goddess must envy such perfect devotion made flesh.
Poseidon, lord of earthquakes and storms, brother to Zeus himself, had noticed the beautiful priestess. Gods notice mortal beauty the way hurricanes notice ships, with devastating inevitability. He ruled the wine-dark seas and the horses that ran wild across Athenian plains. His trident could split mountains or calm the wildest waves. But divine power has appetites that mortal laws cannot restrain. When Poseidon desired something, the earth itself trembled. When he desired someone, neither walls nor vows nor sacred ground could protect them. He had seen Medusa in her temple duties, watched how sunlight loved her golden hair, how her devotion made her beautiful beyond mere flesh. And in the way of gods who have never learned the meaning of the word no, he decided she would be his. It mattered nothing that she served his niece. It mattered nothing that she had taken sacred vows. It mattered nothing that the temple where she served was forbidden to such acts. Gods take what they want. The only question was when.
It happened on a day when storm clouds gathered over Athens like divine wrath. The other priestesses had fled to the lower chambers when lightning began to crack the sky. But Medusa remained at her post, tending the sacred flame that must never be allowed to die. She knelt before Athena's statue, her prayers rising with the smoke, her faith unshakable even as thunder rolled overhead. She did not see the sea god enter. She did not hear his footsteps on sacred marble. She only knew when powerful hands seized her, when the scent of salt and storm filled the holy air, when her screams echoed off temple walls that had known only hymns and whispered prayers. There, in the most sacred space on earth, before the eyes of Athena's statue, Poseidon took what was not his to take. He violated a priestess sworn to divine service. He defiled the temple that was meant to be pure. And when his divine appetite was sated, when the storm clouds cleared and the god of the seas returned to his watery realm, Medusa lay broken on the marble floor where she had prayed every day of her adult life. The sacred flame still burned. The goddess's statue still watched with stone eyes, and nothing would ever be the same.
When Athena returned to her temple, she found her sacred space defiled. The smell of the sea still lingered in air that should have held only incense. Her priestess knelt in torn robes before the altar, weeping tears that fell like rain on marble floors. Any mortal would have seen a victim in need of justice. Any mortal would have demanded punishment for the perpetrator. But Athena was not mortal, and divine logic follows different laws. She saw pollution where mortals would see suffering. She saw shame where mortals would see innocence destroyed. The goddess of wisdom, she who sprang fully formed from Zeus's head, she who had never known the vulnerability of mortal flesh, looked upon her violated priestess and felt only rage, not at her uncle who had committed the crime, but at the victim who had somehow allowed it to happen. In Athena's mind, carved from divine stone that knew no mercy, Medusa had failed in her sacred duty. She had let the temple be defiled. She had broken her vows of purity, regardless of whether the breaking was her choice. The goddess who valued strategy above justice made her decision with the swift brutality that only the truly powerful can afford. Athena's reasoning revealed the brutal mathematics of divine justice. She could not punish Poseidon. He was her uncle, brother to Zeus, equal in power to herself. To challenge him would mean divine war, would upset the careful balance that kept Olympus from tearing itself apart. But someone had to pay for the defilement of her sacred space. Someone had to bear the weight of divine displeasure, and Medusa, broken and mortal and powerless, made the perfect scapegoat. The goddess convinced herself that mercy would be weakness, that sympathy would encourage other violations. She told herself that Medusa must bear some responsibility, must have somehow invited the attention that destroyed her life. In the twisted logic of victim blaming that would echo through every culture for millennia to come, Athena decided that the woman who had suffered most must suffer more. She would transform her priestess into a warning, a deterrent, a monster so terrible that no one would ever again dare approach her sacred spaces with lustful intent. It was not justice, it was not wisdom. It was the age-old solution of the powerful when faced with crimes they dare not properly punish. Blame the victim and call it divine will. Athena raised her hand, and divine power crackled through the temple air like lightning seeking earth. Her voice carried the weight of absolute authority as she pronounced Medusa's fate. The priestess who had served so faithfully would become something no one could bear to look upon. Her golden hair, which had caught sunlight like spun silk, began to writhe and transform. Each strand thickened, darkened, became something alive and venomous. Serpents now crowned her head where once olive leaves had rested. Her eyes, which had held the depth of ocean storms, became weapons that would turn any living thing to stone with a single glance. Her beautiful face became a mask of divine wrath, terrible beyond imagining. Her sisters, Stheno and Uriel, felt the curse's edge touch them too. They became monsters in solidarity, their immortal forms twisted into Gorgon shapes. But they had always been creatures of power and darkness. For Medusa, mortal and faithful, the transformation was a kind of death. She had lost everything: her humanity, her beauty, her ability to connect with any living being. She had become the thing she would be remembered as: Medusa the Gorgon, the monster whose very gaze meant death. And Athena, satisfied that divine justice had been served, turned away from what she had wrought. What emerged from that divine curse was not just a monster, but a tragedy given form. Medusa had become a creature that embodied the ultimate isolation. She could never again look upon another living being without destroying them. Every glance became a death sentence. Every moment of loneliness stretched into eternity. She fled to the edges of the world, to a cave where no mortal would stumble upon her accidentally. There, surrounded by the stone statues of those unlucky enough to meet her eyes, travelers, heroes, men who had come seeking glory and found only death, she lived in exile from everything she had once loved. The serpents that writhed where her hair had been whispered constantly, a chorus of divine punishment that never let her forget what she had lost. She could not see her own reflection without turning the mirror to stone. She could not weep without her tears becoming venom. She had become the perfect victim of divine injustice, punished for her own suffering, made monstrous for the crime committed against her, transformed into a cautionary tale that warned women everywhere what happened to those who somehow allowed themselves to be violated. And in her cave of stone statues and serpentine whispers, Medusa waited for the hero who would finally end her cursed existence.
Perseus came to her cave not for glory, but out of desperation. A tyrant named Polydektes had demanded the impossible, the head of the Gorgon, as a pretext to claim his mother. This was not a quest Perseus chose. It was an ultimatum he could not refuse. He wore Hermes' winged sandals and carried Hades' cap of invisibility. Athena herself had given him a polished shield that would let him see Medusa's reflection without meeting her deadly gaze. The same goddess who had cursed the priestess now armed her killer. Perseus crept through the cave where Medusa's sisters slept, their immortal forms terrible but not deadly to look upon. But Medusa, mortal still despite her monstrous transformation, could be killed. She sensed his approach through the whispers of her serpent hair. She knew what was coming. Perhaps after centuries of isolation and divine punishment for a crime she had never committed, she welcomed it. As Perseus raised his sword, guided by her reflection in Athena's shield, Medusa may have felt something she had not experienced since her transformation began: relief. The blade fell, the monster died, and from her spilled blood sprang Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, the golden warrior, children of the god who had destroyed her life, born only in the moment of her death. Even in her final breath, Medusa's suffering served the purposes of the gods who had betrayed her.
Medusa's head, even severed, retained its deadly power. Perseus carried it as a weapon, turning enemies to stone with the gaze of the woman he had killed. Eventually, he gave it to Athena, who placed it upon her aegis, her shield of divine protection. The face of the goddess's violated priestess became a symbol of the goddess's power, the ultimate irony in a story built from injustices. For thousands of years, Medusa's image would be carved on temple walls, painted on pottery, worn as jewelry and apotropaic symbols. But the stories that survived told only of the monster, never of the priestess. They remembered the snake-haired Gorgon who turned men to stone, but forgot the faithful young woman who had been raped in a sacred space and punished for her own violation. They celebrated the hero who killed her, but ignored the divine crime that created her. Medusa became the perfect example of how history is written: by the victors, by the powerful, by those who benefit from forgetting inconvenient truths. Her real story disappeared beneath layers of heroic myth and divine propaganda, leaving only the image of a monster that had never truly existed. Yet in that image, for those who knew how to look, the truth remained, a reminder of what happens when the powerful refuse to acknowledge their crimes and choose instead to punish their victims. Today, when we speak of victim blaming, when we see survivors punished for their own suffering, when we watch the powerful escape consequences while the powerless bear the weight of divine displeasure, we are watching Medusa's story play out again and again. Her curse was not unique, it was archetypal. The priestess who became a monster because a god could not control his appetites and a goddess could not admit her own failures of justice. This is why her story matters. This is why the truth behind the myth must be told. Medusa was not born a monster. She was made one by the same forces that continue to make monsters of survivors today, by power that refuses accountability, by justice that protects the wrong people, by societies that find it easier to blame victims than challenge perpetrators. Her serpent hair and deadly gaze were not punishments for evil, but symptoms of a system that had failed her completely. And in every age since, in every culture that remembers her name, Medusa's true story whispers the same warning: beware of any justice that punishes the victim and protects the powerful. For in such systems, we are all one divine whim away from becoming monsters ourselves.